Hi, this is Steve Addison for the Movements Podcast, the podcast for people who want to multiply disciples and churches everywhere. Today we're going to talk to Mike Puckett in Boone, North Carolina, about reaching students who'll reach the world.
On the vision of No Place Left. And we started taking the principles of, we call it the working through the brutal facts, that you can't really know what you're aiming for until you know, you can't fix the problem until you know what the problem really is. And the problem we're talking about is lostness. And so it's pretty radical on our campus, even in the American South, where we're in a small rural area. It's a fairly conservative community around us, but the college campus and the little downtown environment around it is not at all like anything around it. And so it is pretty radically lost. It's almost surprising these days when we find someone on campus who is a committed follower of Jesus and not just somebody who has some cultural background. But even those with cultural background who still claim Christ are fairly few and far between. And so what we started doing was crunching the numbers. Okay, if we have 19,000 students on our college campus and we want to reach, we want to reach them all so they all have had the opportunity to hear the gospel and respond to it personally. Well, I personally can't do that enough. We did the math and we found out that I think this was a couple of years ago, but Scott and Anna and I were the local team leading the ministry. We would have to share the gospel with something like 40 people per day each, every day of the semester, in order for every student on campus to hear the gospel. That's, one every 20 minutes or so, or one every 10 minutes if we're actually making time for sleep. And so we really did that math and saw how ridiculous it was to try to come up with that. But it helped build the conviction that if we're going to really reach and saturate our mission field with the gospel, even as small and manageable as that community is, we must multiply ourselves. And this is when we started. This is when we started shifting from just being a little discipleship group on campus to identifying our work as church, that we are being church together and we're reproducing healthy biblical church as we see it in Acts 2 and throughout the New Testament. And so as we started identifying and functioning as a church, we began owning the need for multiplying ministry. That it's not enough for us to gather however many students, X marks the spot, however, fill in the blank on number of students that we could have with us who are sharing the gospel a certain number of times per week. That would never be enough. It would be more encouraging to have more students with us sharing the gospel a certain number of times per week. If everybody's sharing the gospel 5 times a week, and we have 10 versus 50, it's more encouraging to have 50 who are doing it, but it's still not enough. Still not enough. And what it does is it forces us to see that we can't leave our strategy of 4 fields to just the 4th field, that we're starting and gathering a church, or that we're adding new churches as we go. What we realize is time is of the essence in a collegiate setting. They're here at best for 4 years that we actually connect with them. More and more these days are only here for a couple of years, or at least by the time we connect with them on campus. We're seeing this place is not a place that retains people either. They're always leaving. Every semester there are hundreds and hundreds who leave this area and never really come back for any substantial time. So what became clear to us was that trying to do this work, any kind of work, but particularly trying to do multiplying ministry, starting churches on the college campus, was like trying to start a church in an airport. Mm-hmm. You can go park there. You ride the shuttle in. There's food. There are places where people are resting or relaxing as best they can, and a little discomfort, and they're really close to other people. And so they're really good at blocking other people out. But everybody who's there is there for a purpose. And their purpose is to go somewhere else, to go do something else, likely never to see the people around them again. A lot of people don't make best friends in the airport. And that's sort of the scene that we find ourselves in. And so it has forced us in more recent days to begin shifting our focus for ministry away from, well, can we start a church? Can we start a church that, well, yeah, it loses people every year, but then it gains some new people. And so it's just this sort of conveyor belt of people in this one church. Well, then at the same time, if we start 1,000 churches, or let's be more realistic, if we start 15 churches on campus, little simple churches led by students, eventually the people leading those things are going to leave. And so then what are we left with? So it poses all sorts of missiological problems for us when we're working in such a transient environment with young people who don't have a strong background in faith or in the Bible or anything like that. So it really forces us to focus in on what we spend our time on. And what's become clear is that in the process of 4 fields and 5 parts, the entry, gospel, discipleship, church, and leadership development, this work on college campus is a field 5 kind of ministry more than anything else. That we have this really unique time, this opportunity to bring people along with us. We can reach students who are more open now than they'll ever be in the rest of their lives to hearing about the gospel, receiving it, following Jesus, and orienting their life around him for the rest of their lives. This is the moment where they're most likely to make that kind of a decision and set their path on that trajectory for the rest of their lives. But what we're seeing too is that for those who are following Jesus and want to follow him and get as much as they can out of being close with him, identifying with him, and engaging in his mission, we're having to be clear about our identity, that's who we are, that's what we're about, and then we begin to look at every student like they have a countdown timer around their neck of how much time we have with them.
And whether or not they're currently a believer, you're seeing them through the eyes of, when you say field 5, where our job is to multiply leaders out of this university environment who make disciples and plant churches. So
that's right.
This is church planter boot camp.
That's right.
So tell us, and maybe there's a story of an example of how you solved that problem of somebody who's come to know Christ, or maybe they're already a believer, but you've trained to mobilize them to make disciples and plant churches while they're at the university. Have you got any?
There are two examples that I can think of. One is a little bit a longer process that I can speak to, and then the other has been the fruit of really, it happened without us even knowing it. So I can share the first one with you. I've got a student who is in his 2nd year in university here. He's the only believer in his entire family. Mm-hmm. He came to faith somewhere in middle school. And it was a friend, leader of his that had worked with him in youth ministry that connected us. So we met together, shared a little bit about what we were doing in our ministry here. He was interested in being involved, had been a leader in his group that he'd come out of before he came to university. And he seemed pretty interested in what we were doing. We had clarified pretty clearly what we were not. We're here to make disciples and start churches and multiply leaders. And we knew the no place left vision and what its implications were at this point. So all this stuff is pretty clear. He gets involved with us, and we just start seeing faithfulness out of him from a really early time frame. That as we would say, hey, we're aiming to share the gospel with 2 or 3 people a week at this point, per person, and so we're asking him as a brand new student to do that. He's sharing the gospel. He's sharing the gospel with people.
What's his name, Puck?
Yeah, his name is Matthew. His name is Matthew.
Okay.
Yeah. He's like a little son to me, guys. He's just an incredible leader as a 19-year-old already. And so Matthew is, he's out sharing the gospel, and we're asking students, hey, make time to go out for an hour or two a week. And if you make time for that, you'll be able to share the gospel with 2 or 3 people if you're being intentional with it. And so we're just starting simple, starting really easily, pretty low bar, and we're taking them with us. And so he would start going with me. He'd start going with other people. But then I started noticing a trend. Matthew started going out, sharing the gospel on other days. Mm-hmm. And then he's getting halfway through his first semester as a freshman. And I start catching that he's out 4 or 5 different days a week sharing the gospel with people. And he mentioned one day in the midst of that, as we were talking, he said, some of these other guys that are a part of the ministry, they have become friends with him as well. They've got these different hobbies. This one likes to work on cars. This other one works on his motorcycle. And this other one likes to play basketball or whatever. I don't really have a hobby, but I think sharing the gospel is my hobby. Mm-hmm. And that just, I tried to keep it inside, just how proud and excited and kind of shocked that I was at this. And then as the semester winds on, he says, Hey, Puck, can we talk sometime soon? I need to talk to you about time management. And we sit down and we start talking about time management. And he shares with me about how he's taking the maximum load that the university will allow without having to get special permission in his first semester. So he's pretty overloaded with courses. But then he starts to share with me, as he shows me his actual calendar, he's meeting with 8 different people one-on-one for follow-up discipleship. A few of them are believers that are existing believers that he's training. Most of them are not yet believers, and he's taking them through what we call a discovery Bible study process, sharing stories about Jesus. And then what we start to see are these people start coming to Christ a little at a time, one after another. And he's just really genuine in this pursuit. And the question he had about time management the question was, what do I do with all these people? And now my schedule is so full, I don't think I have time to go out and share the gospel anymore. And if I do, I certainly don't have time to start meeting with another person one-on-one every week. What do I do?
Yeah.
And so I remember this moment like it was yesterday. We're sitting in the little cafeteria area in the student union. And I look at him and kind of give him like a little, look out of the side of my eye, say, Matthew, I think you're about to start our very first church. Wow. Wow. And his face, it was priceless. I mean, it's really hard to describe what he looked like, but his eyes got a little big, he got quiet, which is uncommon. And, he's just like the heaviness hit him.
Yeah.
Wow. Wait, what? And we discovered together, it's so incredible to help him discover how a church is born. And, that it was born out of the harvest and out of the work that he was doing, that farmers don't just go out and plant seeds just to plant seeds. They do it because they're motivated by the harvest, because they're hungry or they need to make money or some combination of both. We're motivated for the harvest, and he has been working towards that end, but he didn't see the end goal. He just needed to get started. And as the process grew on him, as it got messier, he needed to know what came next. And so that, I think, was the moment where, I'm no fisherman, but I know the concept of, letting a fish take the bait and then letting it really get a good grip before you pull back on the reel to set the hook. And I think that was when the hook was set with him, was that he realized, oh, this is what it's all about.
Yeah.
This is it. And so it's just been an ongoing rollout with him to see this begin to draw him in, and he's seeing his identity. And it's not because he's a part of our ministry. Now we're just trying to equip him and shepherd him and see, I wonder what Paul thought when he discovered Timothy.
Yeah.
I wonder what he thought. What did he do with him? And how can we equip
wouldn't
him?
have been much when Paul first met him, would not have been much older than 19, probably younger.
Yeah, absolutely. And that has given me a lot of encouragement to see that and
Let's just
recognize
stay
that.
with Matt.
Sure.
How did that work out? How he obviously, if he's meeting with them individually, they don't necessarily know each other, but he formed them into a church start. Is that right?
Yeah, that's exactly right. And it's been difficult in this setting to gather anything. We can function as church in a healthy way, but in terms of a church grabbing its own identity and letting that be something that helps it sustain itself, that's been difficult, because what we're finding is in a college campus setting, these are all people who are uprooted from somewhere else, by and large. You know, there are some locals who go to school here, but they even kind of stay off to themselves and do their own thing. And so your average student in our university has no relationship with anyone who's showing up here. They're from all over the state. It might be all from, you know, some parts of the region. And then there are a few who come in either from across the country or across the world. But for the most part, they don't know their roommates. They don't know their apartment mates. They don't know their hall mates in their dorms. You know, they have no idea who their neighbors are, and they never talk to their classmates. And so you take that reality that they don't have any existing relationship, even weak ties with the people around them, and then you compound it with the fact that they have a really difficult time communicating with each other and connecting. Everything is done through Snapchat and social media and all these kinds of things these days. There is very little in the way of what we call an oikos here. It's very, very little. So that has become a very difficult challenge for us to help people identify with those around them. When we're reaching individuals. I mean, we have yet to reach anyone beyond just the individual. So Matthew has been fighting through that and trying to figure out how to keep people together as he's gathering them into church. And we haven't found the answer to that yet. But what we have seen is that he has grown in his convictions for what we're doing, for not just the process that we use, but the principles behind it. And so it's the principles that have really, I think, grabbed him in the same way that they've grabbed me and Anna and Scott as well. And they're what anchor us even when things don't go the way we feel like they should. And so we've watched little churches start and then crumble. It happens pretty quickly sometimes. And what we find is that if we're more focused on the leaders who are leading those churches, helping them learn through that process, making sure they see Jesus has already given you the authority you need to make disciples, baptize them, teach them to obey, gather them into healthy church. He's given you the authority to do that. And so we want to help you walk through it and learn to be good leaders, to learn to be good practitioners, to learn from things that are falling apart or things that aren't as good as we would like them to be. That's helped them become more confident in who they are. And that's where I think that Field 5 work has come out. And that's how I see somebody like Matthew or others like him in our work.
So gospel's happening. People are coming to faith.
That's right. Yes.
Just through Matthew, eight people, whereas you hardly saw 8 gospel shares in a year.
Exactly.
Discipleship's happening. Groups are forming as church starts, and it's a battle.
That's right.
But you're still staying focused on that task because that's what Jesus has commanded us to do. But you're staying focused on we're growing a leader here through these challenges. So we're sticking with it because it's right. But the reality is people are disconnected and it's hard. The glue's not always there for church formation.
That's right.
Are you seeing any churches form that are cohering?
Yeah, we've had a couple that have started. In fact, the other story I alluded to is a couple of freshman girls, Paige and Julia. Mm-hmm. They just joined our ministry, our church on campus, at the very beginning of the school year, just in August of this year. And we had this interesting moment where one day we were talking about church identity and church formation in our weekly meeting. It was during some practice time that we had. We use the 3/3 as our format for everything that we do when we meet. That's our process or our pattern for our meetings. And so we were going through some practice time together where I was sharing a tool with them and then having them practice it with one another. And the tool we were sharing was the handy guide to a healthy church start. And so it answers the who, what, when, where, and why about church, to begin identifying a new one clearly and concisely. And so we started talking about how, well, we're a church already. We've already done this. And this is how we do it. This is how we begin to identify and name a church, essentially, call it what it is. And one of the girls speaks up and says, well, so we already have identified as a church here. She's missed that whole process because she just came in this semester. I said, yeah, we did. And, she was new, so you never really know whether somebody's on target or not, whether they're really excited about what we're doing or questioning it or whatever. And I said, yeah, we did that. She said, what did that look like? Thought, oh boy, are we about to have a fight here? and I explained a little bit about what that looked like and said, this is the tool that we use. And she said, well, do you have that on paper somewhere, or like is there somewhere you can point me to see that? I told her we would get that to her. And then she makes a comment. She says, I want to make sure that I get my hands on that because I want to go reproduce it with our church that we started in our dorm. I went, whoa, hold on a minute. What? They have started a church. 2 freshman girls have gathered people together and identified them as a church together in their freshman dorm. And so they're meeting. They call it Lounge Church, and it meets in the lounge of their dorm hall. And what they've done is they've started with a strategy of reaching some friends and neighbors that live on their hall and in their building, and they meet on a weekly basis. And what I heard them say was, well, we're trying to take what we're seeing and doing here in our church each week on Tuesday nights and then reproduce that with other people. Now, I don't know a single person that's a part of their church other than those 2 girls who are leading it. And they're just sort of facilitating this same 3/3 pattern and the same tools and principles and things like that. And what has been really encouraging about that is they just started right from the beginning of their lives in school together. They're both believers and they're roommates. They have seen themselves as the house of peace on their own hall. Yeah. And they've begun to gather the people who are there where no one has anything but weak ties on their hall. And so they're trying to leverage that and give people a place to connect. And at this point, it's beginning to last longer than, 6 weeks. We're making it through a whole semester with that one. And there are a couple of other little ones that have existed around. They're on average, a church is looking like anywhere from 5 to 9 people in a gathering setting. Our church that we're all a part of, we call it training church, with the idea being this is to train you to reproduce it with other people. And that training church averages anywhere from 10 to 20 people, depending on the week and time of the semester or school year. But what we do is simple enough and is basic enough that they can turn around and reproduce it in a dorm room. And this is where we really function as leadership developers, because it's not that we necessarily need a certain number of churches in existence to accomplish the mission. That there's going to be a tipping point where that's the case. But what we're doing is we're beginning to teach them to be resourceful in reproducing what it is we do. When it comes to baptizing people, well, where are you going to baptize people? They're using the school pool these days. Doing Lord's Supper together, where are you going to buy implements for communion? If you're not leaving campus, so they're going to the market on campus and are procuring their elements for the Lord's Supper. And we're trying to ask them to do things without needing us to be the ones as non-campus, adults with money to be able to pull strings and do things for them, trying to help them learn to work in a setting where they've got to be more resourceful together. And the same is true of starting gathering and starting identifying a church start and beginning to recognize it as a full-fledged church that has identified together and is functioning as a church. And then, saying, well, you guys need to name it. You need to figure out where you're going to meet. This is on you. They can't expect us to come in and lead it, or to do anything with it. In fact, that would be really strange in this setting. So at this point, it's a major challenge. One of the major challenges, I guess, then is whether students who are leading it have deep enough convictions about what it is they're doing that they're going to help it go from just being a neat little Bible study somewhere to being a church that sees itself as a church. And so we're trying to help coach them through that stage right now. It's an interesting place.
Instead of, in a sense, I like what you're saying. You've only got this limited time. Mm-hmm. Church formation is hard, but we're going to focus on developing leaders who are in the harvest, sharing the gospel, discipling new believers, starting churches, as tenuous as that is in a short period of time, because our mission is to grow people who multiply disciples in churches. And we have 2 or 3 years with them. And they're going to leave this campus knowing how to make disciples and start churches.
That's right.
And so your mission has sort of shifted in a sense. It's still no place left, but your contribution are the workers that you raise up, giving them real tasks to do on campus. Does that sort of sum it up?
Oh, that's a great way to put it, Steve. It's sort of like we're in a live fire scrimmage kind of setting. This is real. This is real life. People are coming to Christ. There is opposition. It's the real deal. It's not just a game. Just because college life is not real life, they feel like it's real life when they're leaving home for the first time. It was the same for me when I was first, beginning to walk down the college path. But it's not real life. You still swipe this card with fake money on it that's your parents' money for food from a cafeteria. And unless I'm eating lunch with a student, that's not real life for me. I have to make breakfast. But in this setting, what we're realizing is I'm at least questioning whether trying to accomplish the no place left vision is really even that important of an idea in our setting, so much as it is building no place left leaders to begin exporting them, so that CPM work or multiplying ministry in a college setting is never about reaching a college as if it could ever be reached and stay reached. But instead it begins, it's a laboratory, a high stakes laboratory where we can begin developing our vision. We can develop our tools, our resources, our processes. So this same guy, Matthew, is one of a few guys that we've had with us where he has helped us train outside of our own context. In fact, we don't do that many trainings or train that many people in our college setting. Like every single person who comes through gets 411 training. Mm-hmm. And then we begin rolling out simple tools one at a time, just week by week in our meeting time as church. But when we look outside of the college campus as well, and we start getting them involved in some of that, we try to be careful about what we take them out of their context to go do somewhere else. But some of these guys have gone with us to help plan and execute a full one-day training for a local church in another part of the state, whether they're trying to reach college students or not. And they've gone with us to some of the 4-day, 4-field intensive trainings. We flew together down to South Florida for one of the 4-day, 4-fields trainings in that area, led by the South Florida team and some other folks. And some of these guys, one was about to graduate. one was a graduate who came with us that is now doing ministry in another setting, and one was a freshman, and they're getting this training already. And so now we're starting to think, how can we help load them up as much as we can without overloading them?
Yes.
With training, equipping, experience, principles and processes, so that they have a full toolbox and a life of experience when they graduate. If I were an overseas, cross-cultural worker, or if I were in some city somewhere pastoring a church, or was a city strategist but didn't have anybody with me, I was building a team or something like that, I want the people that I'm trying to mobilize from our ministry after they graduate, I want them to be the kind of people that those other folks would beg God for. These are the people that would be gifts from God to somebody else. That's what our hope and desire is.
Hey, thanks for listening. If you're enjoying the Movements podcast, why don't you spread the word on social media, or, hey, just tell a friend. It'd be a great help. I'm Steve Addison for the Movements podcast.